All right, so hi everyone, thanks very much for joining this session. My name is Zane West. I work for Dementia Data. I'm responsible for all of the development of our cybersecurity solutions in the Americas. So anything to do with managed services, professional services, consulting. So that kind of brings in, I've been working in managed services, kind of not necessarily directly what I wanted to be doing as part of everything else, but I keep on getting pulled back in there. And part of what I do is a lot about the developing of our cost models and the resourcing necessary and all that sort of thing around how we deliver services to our clients. And part of that became, there was a huge amount of analysis that was done over the course of the last sort of 18 months after we completely refreshed how we approached it, and looking at the kind of, what is minimum viable, and looking at the resource models and how we address it. So really this talk is going to be a little bit about, how does that and the cost of managing infrastructure, how is it impacted by how we choose, what technologies we choose and all that sort of thing. So, and it's a lot more, it's a little bit more compelling than what you would think, and the differences around how that architecture is developed. So just quickly, I won't be doing my job if I didn't tell me a little bit about Dementia Data and entity security. So Dementia Data is part of the NTT Holdings group of companies. If you don't know, that's the Japanese telco. They are the largest telco globally from a revenue perspective. So part of what we get from them and our being able to develop and understand our threat intelligence and all that sort of thing is we get access to about 40% of the world's internet traffic as it passes through their network and the infrastructure. So we get a pretty broad visibility at a lot of the largest marine fiber sort of technology as we go. So pretty large company, 242,000 people globally, a direct presence in about 180 countries around the world. Dementia Data itself, wow, that shows up a lot brighter than you expect. So Dementia Data, a slightly smaller subsidiary of theirs. We're about 35,000 people in about 58 countries. A global revenue of about $9.5 billion. We're a couple of things that we're pretty proud of, and not necessarily directly related to technology and security, is that we are the technology partner for the Tour de France. So all that new experience that you've seen over the last few years about the telemetry data and being able to track individual riders and the whole app, and the whole experience, that's all us. That's some of the stuff that we've done. There was a side components to that, and a really pretty good case study around the threat intelligence and threat analytics and threat defense associated with that particular stuff. During that 3-week period, we get about 10,500 attempted hacks in that environment, and so far nothing successful. We hope it stays that way over the next few years as well. But it's kind of been an interesting development around the technology. So kind of going into the OT and that sort of aspect of it as well, where the little devices on the back of the bicycles, and where it's tracking all that information, transmitting it to the helicopter, down back to the big mobile data center that we have to have. This is one of these big 18-wheeler trucks that go there, and this expands out. It's pretty impressive to see. Okay. This is kind of just a quick look at kind of our global top 350 clients that we have. It covers a pretty broad spectrum as far as the verticals are concerned. So we've got exposure in a lot of different areas around the world. Okay, just and that's the last thing you'll hear about Dementia Data specifically. Okay, so what we're trying to do is that everybody knows and understands that there is such a significant skills gap in the market. And the last stats that I got from a report was 600,000 cybersecurity vacancies in the US at the end of 2016. They're expecting that to be north of 1 million by the end of 2020. Okay, so with that, and that third line over there, the 1,600 cybersecurity vendors in the US at the moment is making that even more difficult because of the skills necessary to be able to support and implement and manage those technologies. We're not developing skills enough. I was quite impressed to see that the 100 cybersecurity students that were here as part of this over the course of the last day and a half, And it's impressive, but there's nowhere near enough of that. If you think about if they're growing at about 100,000 new vacancies in the North America and every year, we're only producing about 10,000 maybe. So it's always going to get worse and worse. Okay, so we need to do more about that. But I think that we also need to be sensible about how we're architecting our solutions. So we've got this unnecessarily overly complex architectures that is, as a result of that. Okay, and there's so many things that are all over the show. And this is just such a small snippet of the number of vendors that are playing in each one of those different domains, security domains. So we have to simplify this. We have to figure it out a little bit better. So what we did like I said, over the course of the last year and a half, we've changed the way not only we track the activities associated with management, but you're kind of really just we wanted to get a good understanding of where all of our effort was going when we manage client environments as part of a managed service, and then see what the implications are about if we adjusted architectures in a certain way. To see how that had an impact on your operational cost, and it's pretty compelling. Okay, so that's what we're going to run through over the course of the next day. So this is our reference architecture model, and I've taken a particular case study because they were the poster child for I'm going to buy the best of breed of everything. It was like a who's who on the Gartner Magic Quadrant in every single technology that they had, and often we found that they were duplicating in technologies that they had bought. So we decided to go through, and through one of our assessment that we go through, we kind of identify how, from a business perspective, how we want to get it, how do we simplify your architecture, but how do we improve your overall security posture. And what we found is I chose 4 different models around how we wanted to re-architect it, and you'll see over the course of the next few slides, there's quite a lot of data that came out of that, and you can see how the variances are. So just to frame it up a little bit, we use ServiceNow as our ticketing system over there, and there's a lot of really cool things that you can do if you configure it properly. So, but configuring it properly needs an army of people in itself. So we're fortunate that we've got an army of people that do that, and that's all they do. So one of the things that we did was, and it's not only good enough that we wanted to know that this is something to do with web filtering, or it's got to do with firewall and that sort of thing. We broke it down into further classifications. So we've got if you think about when you're proactively doing managed services or managing your own environments, if you think from a CIO perspective, there are things that you need to be doing on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. There are things that you need to do in order to be able to maintain that. And the cost drivers around this and your effort drivers are really around, okay, how many devices do I have? How many device types do I have? Okay, how many of those have different management consoles, management platforms? What tools and technologies do I need to have in place in order to be able to monitor and make sure that they're working the way they are? So it's not only just the technologies that I'm managing, but I have to manage the back-end platforms that I'm using to manage those as well. So all of those have an impact on how we're doing it. So, if we think about back to that reference architecture model, how it breaks out, there's a little bit all over the show. So what we've tried to do over here is I focused my attention on, there was a much broader analysis that happened, but we wanted to focus very specifically around the technology management as well, so the devices and the individual pieces that we have to do. Forget about the threat intelligence component and the threat monitoring component for now. It's a whole different monster that we have to deal with. So we did everything around the day-to-day activities, the reporting sort of elements, making sure that it's all healthy, and then we excluded anything that was considered an incident, as in a device-based incident. So anything that was, something's broken that was working and I now have to fix it. So we excluded that from it because that's a bit of an unknown, and it's all over the map depending on maturity and the age and technology and all that sort of thing. And then we excluded the security event monitoring. So what we then looked at is in an organization, if you wanted to stand up a full 24/7 operation, here are the resources that you would need. Okay, so level 1, level 2, level 3 engineering, the operations management, the security architect, all that sort of thing. We looked at that. So we're focusing our attention over the course of the rest of this presentation on that element of what we have. And what we found is, irrespective, no matter what the device type or what the technology was, the average time you have to spend on every device every month is about 6.4 hours, irrespective. It's about just averaged out across there. It didn't matter if it was a router or a switch or a firewall. That's just to make sure it keeps working. Okay. So, and what we then did was we said, okay, fine. In order for us to be able to do this, this is the resource model that we looked at. And I've got an organization chart coming up in a second. So we focus on operations management. So you need to have a kind of a SOC manager, okay? And then you need somebody who is managing the process side of it. So if you think about your ITIL framework, you're having respective, a change management, an incident management, a problem manager, all that sort of thing. So that might be spread across 5 or 6 different resources, depending on how you've got your organization structured. But when it came down to it, we've got that, it's kind of, you needed those two. Also then looking at the security architect. Now, it's one of those roles that they should be strategic. They should be, but we allocated and dedicated about 30% of their time to security operations. But it's important that you have redundancy. It's the worst thing in the world when you've got an architect who decides things and goes out there and they build it. And then he leaves, and it takes another 6 months for another one to come back. You always have to have that replacement. So it's important that you have 2 of those in place. Minimum viable for a level 1 type resource, if you're going 24/7 operations, to allow for people taking vacation time off, training, all that sort of thing, is 7 people. That gives you the ability to be able to cover a full 24/7 operation. The level 2 engineers, we decided on what's minimum viable. Because the level 2 engineer, we can backfill from a level 3. So we decided to the combination of the 2 for 24/7 operation would be we're about 5 resources, and the level 3 on a technology, you need about 2. So now keep it in mind that when you're looking at this resource model, it is, in order for you to say I have a 24/7 operation on a technology, I have to have that. Doesn't matter how much time I'm allocating to it, that's the minimum viable to support a single technology. Okay, so if I had 29 technologies and a level 1 kind of going into, look at that. So that's just kind of a diagram of that same resource model. I did move out the analysts on the right-hand side, but we're focused on everything on the left-hand side of this diagram, this organization chart. So what we did, this was also the split in terms of the average effort associated with each one of those resource types over the course of, in that 6.4 hours, basically be able to do any support on that and make sure it's all working. That's kind of your split. You'll notice that the level 2 analyst and the level 2 engineer is pretty much the same. And that's where and the level 1's it kind of overlaps in the same way over there. So, but we're just going to focus on the level 2s or the kind of the operation side of it for now. So when we're looking at a level, kind of how many do I need on each technology type, but then you also got to factor in, okay, so realistically, a level 1, level 2, level 3 engineer, how good can they be on a single technology? So, and that sort of comes into, so this is kind of the model that we went with. We would assume everybody can be a level 1 on at least 10 technologies. Whether you're most basic, well, essentially all that means is I've been trained, okay? I don't really have any experience. I've never been exposed to the technology, but we can just assume that they can be a level 1. Level 1 on 10 technologies. And the level 2, for a level 1 engineer, you probably, as they move up and they get a little bit of experience, they kind of move into a level 2 technology. So it's a prerequisite for us to define them as a level 2, is they have to have a certain amount of experience, like a year or 2 years worth of experience on that technology for us to kind of move into that. So typically you'll find that a level 2 or level 1 engineer will be maybe a level 2 on one technology. That's as they start to focus in a particular area. Then a level 2 engineer will be focused on, once again, they're at a level 1 on about 10, a level 2 on, and we were generous over here, 4 technologies, and then kind of a level 3 up to 1, because then we start to classify them as a level 3 if they go above that. And then the level 3 is really your senior people. Once again, we were very generous, as in to say that they can be an SME on 4 technologies. Okay, realistically, it's probably closer to 2, but we were generous in the model, just to make sure that we can kind of get it. Otherwise, the numbers really got skewed badly. Okay, so when we look at the kind of the skills and the capability of a security architect, they're your generalist SME. They've probably got 10 years experience, that kind of thing. They've been doing this a long time. but really we only wanted to have a 30% allocation of their time. They should be focused on all the strategic initiatives within the organization. They should be out there building the new stuff that's out there. Okay. Operations manager, I said, focused on the ITIL, the ITIL as well as in the SOC manager. They're very two different functions. And then it's very seldom you're going to find somebody who's going to be able to do both of them. Okay. And then the level 1 engineer, so like I said, not much experience, focused on 24/7, and it's really the up-down monitoring. If they're spending more than 15 minutes on a ticket in any way, shape, or form, they're spending too long. Okay, it's really it's a catch and dispatch. This is what I'm doing. Yes, it's fine. Hand it off to a level 2 engineer who can actually do something about it. It's really just that initial validation. Okay, level 2 security engineer. Kind of we looked at minimum 2 years experience. We want them certified on the technology. We want to make sure that they know what they're doing and they're able to catch the majority of this. And this becomes a little bit more important a little bit later on, is that this is where the majority of your cost goes, is that level 2. It's a big chunk of it, and it eats away. And then the level 3 engineers, we're looking at minimum 5 years. It's generally an 8x5. We do an on-call model with them. That's a minimum, keeping in mind, minimum viable for a technology is that there should be somebody who's an SME. So invariably what happens, you don't have a skill in that technology, you're going to have to hire somebody in. So it has a significant impact on how you're doing. Okay. All right. So my Bob architecture, best of breed architecture, that is the starting point. So in this particular use case that we looked at, and we did quite a few, but in that we ended up, based on that reference architecture that I showed you earlier on, we had 29 different technologies based on management platforms, device types, technologies, all that sort of thing. And it was 154 devices. And it's really an obscene sort of thing. You only have 20 firewalls in there, so you can remember how many other things that they have over there that have to be supported and maintained. That is a significant cost. Then somebody threw a spanner in the works over there, and they said, okay, well, we've got a bunch of these firewalls, and they've got virtual instances running on that. That has a surprising impact on your operational cost. And it serves, in my opinion, generally no value. Okay? It may be going back 10, 15 years when we had this typical sandwich type firewall and we wanted air gaps and all that sort of thing. But the controls and the zoning and that sort of thing that you can do on the firewalls now, really don't see a value in doing that. Okay? But it had significant operational costs. So if you think about using a technology like AlgoSec, for example, or TwoFin, something like that, where you're doing the configuration, compliance, monitoring, and management over there. Every time you have another virtual instance, that's a license, okay? Serving no purpose. You're just costing you more money. It's more time, it's more effort to support the technology, as well as then produce the reports and align with that, okay? So that changed it to 162 device instances in this scenario and 29 technologies once again. So what we then did was we said, okay, fine, how do we consolidate this? So when we looked at it and we said, okay, fine, this client was a pretty big Cisco shop and they were pretty good, they had Microsoft E5 licensing, and we looked at taking all the technologies they had into account and what they had without them buying a single new technology, stuff they were already licensed for, okay? We were able to cut it down to 19 technologies, okay, different technology sets, and 103 devices. Okay, so that's a significant move. Now if we start to adopt like some of the SaaS components, we are able to cut it down even further, a little bit less. So we went up by technologies, but we cut the number of devices. Now the reason why I say that number of devices and the technologies is impacted by SaaS. So if you think about it, we're transferring risk. If I have to maintain a device or an underlying platform, okay, on a technology, okay, that means I'm responsible for that. If I'm leveraging a SaaS, so think about like email security, like things like Proofpoint or Microsoft Technologies or wherever else, those SaaS components, you don't have to touch anything as far as the underlying technology. It now becomes a factor of how many users do I have and how many tickets are they logging on a monthly basis. So it takes away that 6.4 hours a month that I have to worry about upgrading that technology. It just takes it away. It's gone. So transfer risk. Okay. Yeah, I'm talking too fast. You need to tell me to slow down when I start running out of breath.
You're transferring the risk as long as you're going with a decent provider, right? Because
correct.
Yeah.
It's like, you go with, you pick your top 5 vendors.
If you were patching things yourself, then you have a strategy.
Yeah.
Then you're going to rely on their strategy to how they patch their systems.
Yeah, and I think they go through a lot more rigor on those SaaS technologies than your typical organization does in themselves. So I think in patch management is probably the one that gets neglected the most out of all of those things. And I think that also factor that in when you go into a service provider. Invariably, it's not included by default. It's one of those add-on extras. Okay, so that then it just gets neglected. And so something interesting about that is typically, so invariably, what is the fix for some problem that is discovered on that? Install the patch. So you might as well just proactively install the patches and make sure it's maintained. Okay, so it cuts back a lot of the issues that you run into. Okay, so this is kind of a cross-section across each with all of those different modules. And you'll see I've done this throughout. So we're looking at how many bodies we needed. In the first two models, it was pretty similar because you kind of had that overlap and it was like a 2 or 3, that sort of thing. So when we're looking at the best of breed as well as segmented appliances, we had the same number of resources. Note the number that I need based on that architecture, that initial one on the L2 resources, 15 people. Considering the minimum viable for a technology set, and based on how many there can be a level 2 or a level 3 on in each one of those, it drives it up a lot. Okay, so that makes it almost not viable at all. So when I looked at it, so let's turn that into a dollar amount. Okay, now you're spending 2.5, nearly 3, kind of somewhere 2.5 to 3 million on the level 2 resources. You're spending and you can see the difference. As you move through the two different models, it drops down quite a lot. And going into the L2, the L3 resources and the L1s. So the L1s stay the same. And the reason being is that, like I said, it's a catch and dispatch. I'm looking at its monitoring, its up, down, its performance, it's based on alerts and that sort of thing, and I'm just handing it off. They're so low utilized, but I can almost exponentially increase the number of devices that I'm monitoring based on my tool set. So the tool set that you're using to be able to support that it becomes important. And then as we move to the so productive hours. So when I talk about productive hours, I'm saying that an L2 engineer, if fully utilized, is really only 80% utilized. An L3 engineer, we want it kind of around about the same mark. An L1, a little bit less. So L3, we set a little bit less because we want them to be kind of moving more into that architecture. We use them a little bit more around the implementations of new technologies, that sort of thing. So we want to focus most of our attention on that L2, L1 sort of space. And you can see how it varies as you move through the 4 different models over here. Okay, so significant drop as you move down into the kind of the L1, specifically in the L1 and the L2s, and around as it relates to the respective technologies. Okay. Okay. Now this is interesting. If you go back to that one over here, you're sitting in the $1.5 to $2 million as a cost of resources, and it's particular on the L2s. If we move into just actual cost to company, the effective utilization of those resources, we're sitting at about 400,000, even in the most complex model. Okay, so you've got highly underutilized resources based on the complexity of the environment. Okay, you're not necessarily implementing and leveraging the technology properly. Okay, and it kind of moves you into a not really effective way of using those resources. And I think that is also one of those factors that comes into play as far as, do I do it myself? Do I outsource it? Okay, so one of those really sort of kind of interesting. So if I look at it like this, your effective utilization of all your resources is less than 20% if you're doing it in-house. Okay, and that's being able to really effectively use the technology. Okay, going into an outsource, it's upwards of 100% utilized, kind of there because simply you don't care. You're buying an outcome. Okay, so it's really kind of a significant difference. And that graph in itself, the way it shows over there, the level 3 resources, the level 2, the level 1, I mean those numbers are minuscule by comparison. It's usually about less than 10% the cost. Doing it properly, if you had to implement the same model in-house, it's about 10% of the cost if you did it through an outsourcer as opposed to doing it internally. And that's not even factoring in the tools and technologies you have to buy. Okay. So kind of looking at this, so if I look at the just kind of the consolidated, going into the device counts, looking at the resource cost associated with it. So what I did here was to say, okay, fine, at what point does it make it viable to do it in-house? So I had to increase to get it close on the L2 resources, to even get close. So I had to be more than 500 devices, okay? And I had to increase the end user count to over 50,000. Okay, so how many organizations, raise your hand if you're over 50,000 users in this room. Okay, not a lot of companies. Okay, it's not, even then, it was not effective. You notice the L1 resources are still underutilized. Okay, the L2 resources was where I got close, and that's what I was kind of aiming for. L3 resources, once again, not effectively, and the architect became completely overutilized. So would have to then increase it. And the ops manager was pretty much there or thereabouts. Okay, so that's kind of just a breakdown of what that looked like. So I just wanted to make sure that you kind of think about it a little bit differently, understand that these complexities, and I think that the 1,600 vendors out there all are wanting us to buy the new shiny object is making it extremely difficult for us. And buying into that is really kind of on us as a whole, because we're chasing that new shiny object. And I think that our media doesn't help us in any way, shape, or form either, because there's always the biggest and the worst thing that happens out there. If we picked the kind of the firewall, let's go with firewall, and you pick the top 5 vendors, and whether it be green, blue, pink, red, whatever, I don't really care. The variations in the functionality, the ability on each one of those technologies, you're really looking at a 1 to 2% difference. It's really not much at all on how good is it as far as the technology. When we go out and we write RFPs, okay, we do this, we have this habit of going through this feature list and this ridiculous number of features, and you have to check all these boxes over here, and we're only going to use about 10% of them anyway. Why are we doing that? Okay, it's just got to make sense, okay, as to why are we choosing a technology in a particular way. Also looking at some of the other factors that you have to look at is that how well do they consolidate the management platform of that? It's all very well saying I'm going to go with this vendor and I'm going to select all of their technologies, but when every single one of their technologies has a different management platform, okay, a complete waste of time. You might as well be buying 10 different vendors. So you want to focus on making sure that you've got a consolidated management platform. And I think that we should be pushing the vendors themselves as well to understand and make sure that they're moving in that direction. I'm a big fan of SaaS-based management platforms that we can use, kind of that sort of thing. That's a controls they put around that, the multi-tenancy capabilities of that, even within your own organizations as such, like being able to leverage a SaaS platform that allows this guy in South America and this guy in Canada and this guy in Europe to be able to manage their own and configure their own devices, but now also being able to have that overarching ability to be able to push down configuration makes a huge difference. As soon as we've got a consolidated management platform, your patch management has become so easy. It becomes like this click. Think about, I love to pick on a checkpoint every now and then, but they've got the operating system that you have to upgrade, and then you've got the application that runs on top of that. And there's something else to factor in, okay? How many pieces of that do I have to upgrade and patch and maintain? So, we've got to look at it. It's got to be technologies that work well together. I think a couple of other things. So we're looking at that. Looking at the, I think if we go then into the analytics sort of piece of it, and I didn't really go into that at all, but when you go into the analytics piece, the data component of that and the ability to manage that infrastructure, forget about so I didn't even factor in that SIM architecture and all that sort of thing. It's that platform and the time it takes for you to get it up to speed. Also, the process element around the process maturity within your organization makes a huge difference on your ability to be able to maintain that. I think what we should be focusing on is, if one of the things that I never see in an IT organization really, okay, and we're starting to see a little bit of it like this, is DevOps, okay. So if you think about if I consolidated, used some sort of an orchestration platform and cut down that had a simplified way of managing every single one of those technologies, so it's a point and a click and I don't really have to know how to use whatever technology or vendor it is, and I'm able to perform a function based on some automation that was developed at the back end. Okay, and we're seeing a few technology startup coming out that are doing that, focusing on that sort of area. But it's important because what we want to do is we want to push that effort from the L3 down to the L2 and the L2 down to the L1. It's going to significantly cut your costs, and that's by doing that sort of operational, automation, and you can see a lot more, the AI, the automation, that sort of thing is kind of coming out. It's really important. So I think that those are the questions you should be asking the vendors. When you're talking about how are you doing this, how you handle that, which orchestration platforms are you integrated with, what kind of community do you have around the development of those things. Okay, so I'm going to leave you on that thought. I appreciate your time. If you've got any questions, anything else about the further analysis and anything else that we've done, by all means, go ahead.
Thank you.